The rain was lashing against the cracked windscreen of David's old hatchback, a rhythmic drumming that matched the frantic pounding in his chest. In his hand, he gripped a crumpled piece of paper, the address, for the job interview that was supposed to save his family from the brink of eviction. He was 10 minutes away from the chance of a lifetime, a position that would finally put food on the table for his daughter, Lily. But as he rounded the bend of the deserted coastal road, he saw her. A woman was slumped against a rusted guardrail, her white coat stained with oil and blood, waving a frantic, trembling hand for help. David looked at the clock, then back at the woman. He knew that if he stopped, he would lose everything he had worked for. But if he kept driving, he might be leaving a soul to perish in the storm. Little did he know, the choice he made in that split second was about to shatter his world and rebuild it in a way he never thought possible. David lived in a small, damp flat on the edge of the city where the paint peeled like sunburnt skin and the heaters only worked when they felt like it. At 34, he was a man who had been weathered by the storms of life long before this literal one hit. His wife had passed away 3 years ago, leaving him with a mountain of medical debt and a 4-year-old daughter named Lily, who was the absolute center of his universe. Every morning, David would wake up at 5 o'clock to prepare Lily's porridge, making sure to scrape the bottom of the pot to get every last bit of nutrition for her. He worked 3 part-time jobs, moving from a warehouse floor to a delivery van and then to a cleaning crew at night. He was exhausted, his bones aching with a weariness that sleep couldn't touch. Yet when he looked into Lily's bright, innocent eyes, he found the strength to keep pushing. He told her stories of a better life, of a house with a garden where she could run without hitting a wall, and a bedroom that didn't smell of damp. The opportunity at Sterling Heights Corporation was more than just a job. It was a lifeline. It was a senior logistics role that paid 3 times what he currently earned combined. He had spent weeks preparing, studying the company's history, refining his CV, and practicing his answers in the mirror until his throat was hoarse. He had even spent his last few pounds on a second-hand suit from a charity shop, a navy blue ensemble that was a little tight around the shoulders but made him look like the professional he desperately wanted to be. This was the final round of interviews, and the recruiter had hinted that he was the top candidate. All he had to do was show up on time and prove he was the reliable, hard-working man they needed. On the morning of the interview, the sky was a bruised purple, heavy with the promise of a deluge. David kissed Lily goodbye at the childminder's house, promising her that today was the day everything would change. He felt a rare spark of hope as he climbed into his battered car. The engine groaned, but it started. As he drove through the winding roads that led toward the corporate district, the heavens opened. The rain was so thick it felt like driving through a waterfall. The wipers struggled to clear the glass and the wind buffeted the light car. David checked his watch. He was on schedule. He had 20 minutes to spare, enough time to compose himself and dry off before walking into the glass and steel lobby of Sterling Heights. He rehearsed his opening line one more time, his voice steady despite the nerves. Then he saw the car. It was a sleek, silver saloon that had swerved off the road and collided with a stone pillar. Smoke was beginning to mingle with the heavy rain. At first, David thought the vehicle was empty, but then he saw a figure stumbling out of the driver's side door. It was a woman, perhaps in her 50s, dressed in expensive-looking clothes that were now torn and soaked. She looked disoriented, her movements jerky and panicked. She took a few steps toward the road and then collapsed onto her knees, her hand clutching her side. David's heart leapt into his throat. He slowed down, his eyes darting from the woman to the digital clock on his dashboard. If he stopped, he would be late. In the corporate world, lateness was a cardinal sin, especially for a high-stakes interview. He thought of Lily. He thought of the eviction notice sitting on his kitchen table. He thought of the life he was trying to build. But then he looked at the woman again. She was alone on a road where cars rarely passed in this weather. If he didn't stop, who would? The moral weight of the moment pressed down on him harder than the rain. The internal battle lasted only seconds, though it felt like hours. David pulled his car onto the muddy shoulder, the tires skidding slightly. He didn't even grab his umbrella. He simply threw the door open and ran toward the woman. By the time he reached her, the cold rain had already soaked through his cheap suit, the fabric clinging to his skin. The woman was shivering violently, Her face pale and streaked with blood from a small cut on her forehead. She looked up at him with eyes full of terror and confusion. David knelt in the mud, ignoring the ruin of his trousers. He spoke in a calm, steady voice, the one he used when Lily had a nightmare. He told her his name and promised her that she was going to be okay. He checked her for major injuries. Noting the way she winced when she moved her left arm, it looked like a fracture or perhaps a severe sprain. The woman tried to speak, her voice a mere whisper against the howling wind. She was worried about her phone, which had been lost in the wreck, and she seemed fixated on a meeting she was supposed to attend. David realized then that they were in similar positions, both racing against time for something important. He helped her stand, his arm firm around her waist as they struggled back toward his car. The wind tried to knock them over, and the mud made every step a gamble. He managed to get her into the passenger seat, immediately turning the heater to full blast. He found a clean towel in the back, one he kept for Lily, and gently wrapped it around her shoulders. He used a first aid kit from the glove box to clean the cut on her head, his hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. As he worked, David glanced at his watch. He was now 5 minutes late for the start of the interview. His heart sank. He knew the protocol for these big firms. If you weren't there 5 minutes early, you were late. And if you were late, you were gone. He felt a wave of despair wash over him. He had sacrificed his daughter's future for a stranger. The woman watched him, her breathing finally beginning to level out. She thanked him repeatedly, her voice shaking. She asked him where he was going. Noticing his suit and the folder of documents on the back seat, David tried to smile, though it felt more like a grimace. He told her he had an interview at Sterling Heights, but that it didn't matter now. He told her that her safety was more important. He knew he couldn't just leave her there, and the ambulance would take too long to arrive in this weather. He decided to drive her to the nearest hospital himself, which was in the opposite direction of the corporate district. As he pulled back onto the road, he felt a strange sense of calm. The decision was made. The job was gone, but he was doing the right thing. The woman asked him about himself, and David found himself opening up. He spoke about Lily, about his late wife, and about the struggle of the last few years. He didn't speak with bitterness, but with a quiet resilience that seemed to fascinate her. She listened intently, her eyes never leaving his face. She told him her name was Elena and that she worked in the city too. She apologized profusely for making him miss his interview, promising that she would find a way to make it up to him. David just shook his head, telling her that any decent person would have done the same, but deep down, he was mourning the life that had just slipped through his fingers. By the time David reached the hospital and saw Elena into the hands of the emergency staff, 2 hours had passed. He stood in the sterile, brightly lit waiting room, a stark contrast to the dark, rainy world outside. He was a mess. His hair was plastered to his forehead. His suit was ruined and caked with mud, and he was shivering from the cold. He looked like a man who had lost everything, which, in a way, he had. He walked to a public phone and called the recruitment office at Sterling Heights. He didn't expect them to understand, but he felt he owed them an explanation. The receptionist was cold and clipped. She told him that the hiring manager, Mr. Henderson, had already moved.
On to the next candidate, and that the position would
likely be filled by the end of the day. David tried to explain the emergency, but the woman simply said that reliability was a core value of the company and hung up. David sat on a plastic chair in the hospital lobby, his head in his hands. He felt a hollow ache in his chest. How was he going to tell Lily? How was he going to face another month of choosing between heating and food? He felt a surge of anger at the world, at the unfairness of it all. He had done the right thing, and he was being punished for it. He stayed for another hour, waiting to hear if Elena was okay. The nurse finally came out and told him that she had a broken arm and a mild concussion, but she was going to be fine. She had been moved to a private room and had asked to see him. But David decided against it. He didn't want her to feel obligated to help him, and he didn't want to see the pity in her eyes when she saw the state of him. He left the hospital and drove back to his flat. the silence of the car feeling heavy and suffocating. When he got home, he changed out of his ruined suit and sat at his small kitchen table. He stared at the eviction notice, the red ink seeming to glow in the dim light. He felt like he had failed his daughter. He spent the evening playing with Lily, trying to hide his distress, but she was an intuitive child. She asked him if he got the job, and David had to swallow hard before telling her that it hadn't worked out this time. He promised her that they would be okay, though he wasn't sure how. That night he couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the events of the day in his head. Did he regret stopping? No. He couldn't have lived with himself if he had driven past that woman, but the cost was so high. The next morning, David's phone rang. It was an unknown number. He expected it to be a bill collector, but when he answered, a professional-sounding voice asked for Mr. David Miller. The caller identified themselves as an assistant from Sterling Heights. David's heart skipped a beat. He thought perhaps they were giving him a second chance, maybe a lower-level position. The assistant told him that he was required to attend a meeting at the headquarters at 2:00 that afternoon. When David tried to ask what it was about, the assistant remained vague, saying only that it was a matter of great importance regarding his recent application. David felt a flicker of hope, though he tempered it with caution. He didn't have another suit, so he cleaned his old one as best he could, scrubbing the mud out of the fabric and ironing it until the creases were sharp. He looked presentable if a bit worn. He dropped Lily off and drove back to the glass and steel towers, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. When David arrived at the Sterling Heights headquarters, the atmosphere was different. The receptionist, who had been so dismissive on the phone the day before, now stood up when he approached. She looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and respect. She told him that he was expected and escorted him personally to the top floor, an area usually reserved for the executive board. David felt out of place in his cheap, scrubbed suit as they walked past sleek mahogany desks and art-filled hallways. He was led to a large boardroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. At the head of the table sat Mr. Henderson, the hiring manager David was supposed to meet the day before. Beside him were several other high-level executives. They all looked up as David entered, their expressions unreadable. Mr. Henderson stood up, but before he could speak, a door at the far end of the room opened. David gasped. Walking toward them, her arm in a pristine white cast and a small bandage on her forehead, was Elena, but she wasn't dressed in the torn clothes from the day before. She was wearing a sharp charcoal gray power suit, and her presence commanded the room. The executives all stood in unison. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat and introduced her. Mr. Miller, I believe you've met our chief executive officer, Elena Sterling. David's jaw dropped. He felt a wave of shock so intense he had to grip the back of a chair to steady himself. The stranger he had rescued from the rain wasn't just an employee. She was the head of the entire corporation. Elena walked over to David, a warm, genuine smile on her face. She ignored the formal atmosphere of the boardroom and reached out to take his hand. David, she said, her voice rich and steady, I believe we have some unfinished business. She turned to the board members and told them the story of what had happened on that rainy road. She described how David had risked his own future to help a woman he didn't know. She spoke about his kindness, his composure under pressure, and the way he had treated her with such dignity and care. Mr. Henderson told me that reliability is a core value of this company, she said, glancing at the hiring manager. And I agree. But there is a difference between showing up on time for a meeting and showing up for humanity when it matters most. David showed a level of character that cannot be taught. He didn't just meet our standards. He exceeded them in a way that moved me deeply. David stood there overwhelmed. He felt tears pricking at his eyes, but he blinked them back. He had spent so long fighting for a scrap of hope, and now it was being handed to him in a way he could never have imagined. Elena looked him in the eye and told him that the senior logistics role was his if he still wanted it. But then she went further. She explained that she had been looking for someone to lead a new community outreach initiative, a role that required empathy, leadership, and a deep understanding of the struggles ordinary people face. She offered him the position of Director of Community Relations, with a salary and benefits package that would change his and Lily's lives forever. The room was silent as David processed the words. The consequences of his mistake hadn't been ruin, they had been his salvation. He realized then that his act of kindness hadn't just saved Elena, it had saved him too. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of change for David and Lily. He accepted the position, and for the first time in years, he didn't have to worry about the cost of groceries or the threat of a cold radiator. They moved out of the damp flat and into a small, bright house with a garden, just as he had promised Lily. He watched his daughter run through the grass, her laughter a sound that healed the remaining scars in his heart. At Sterling Heights, David flourished. He brought a unique perspective to the executive table, reminding the company of the human element in every decision they made. He became a respected leader, known not just for his efficiency, but for his integrity and the way he looked out for his team. Helena became a close friend and a mentor to David. They often spoke about that day in the rain, and Elena admitted that she had been at a crossroads in her own life, feeling disconnected from the world her company served. Meeting David had reminded her of the power of individual kindness and the importance of looking beyond the bottom line. She told him that she hadn't just given him a job, he had given her a renewed sense of purpose. David never forgot where he came from. He used his position to implement programs that supported single parents and provided opportunities for those who had fallen through the cracks of society. He became a beacon of hope for many, a living testament to the idea that doing the right thing is never truly a mistake. One evening, as David was tucking Lily into bed in her new room, she looked up at him and asked, "Daddy, why are we so lucky?" David smiled, sitting on the edge of her bed. He told her that it wasn't just luck. He explained that sometimes life tests us to see what kind of people we really are. He told her that being kind and helping others is the most important thing a person can do, even when it's hard, and even when it feels like it might cost you something. He wanted her to grow up knowing that the world can be a beautiful place if you choose to bring light into it. Lily drifted off to sleep, a peaceful smile on her face, and David felt a profound sense of gratitude. The story of the man who skipped his interview to save a stranger became a legend within the halls of Sterling Heights and beyond. It served as a reminder that success isn't just about titles, salaries, or being on time. It's about the choices we make when no one is watching, and the courage it takes to put someone else's needs above our own. David's life had been transformed not because he was the most qualified candidate on paper, but because he was a man of character. As he stood by the window of his new home looking out at the stars, he knew that he had finally found what he was looking for. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was truly living, and it all started with a single choice in the pouring rain. Life has a funny way of coming full circle. When we think we are losing everything by doing the right thing, we might actually be clearing the path for something greater than we ever imagined. David's story reminds us that kindness is never a waste of time, and that your character is your greatest asset. In a world that often prizes speed and self-interest, never forget the power of a selfless act. You never know who you are helping, or how that one moment of compassion might ripple out to change your entire destiny. Be the light in someone else's storm. You might just find that they become the light in yours.